All right, well, it's 9:02 on my computer, so we will make a start, and I'm just going to start with our opening karakia. Kia ino tato, mori oho, mori tu, mori ora kia tato, homie, huie, taike. And now I'm going to pass over to our facilitator this morning, Glenn Shedbolt.
Thanks, Natalie. Just checking I'm not muted. All right, so we have three very esteemed guests with us today. We've got Jane Secker from University of London, Stephane Goldstein from InformAll in the UK, and Anne-Lise from the House of Commons. So I'm not sure which of the three of you are planning on speaking first. So who's first up?
It's going to be me, actually, Glenn. So, but we're sort of doing a bit of a passing the baton around us. So, good morning, everyone. It's evening time here in the UK. I'm Jane Secker, and I am chair of the CILIP Information Literacy Group. I'm in my day job. I'm a senior lecturer at City University, teaching in educational development, educational technology, and I've obviously been fairly busy during the pandemic with a lot of online teaching, running webinars and things, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my colleagues who are committee members of the CILIP Information Literacy Group, Stephane Goldstein and Anne-Lise. So we're going to, as I say, do a bit of a passing the baton around between us, because there's different topics that we're each going to sort of focus on. I think the kind of premise that we were invited to come and speak to you was around the work that we've been doing with CILIP, which is the Library Association of the UK, of which we are a subgroup, a special interest group. We've been collaborating since sometime last year to put together what we're calling a Media and Information Literacy Alliance. So we're going to be telling you a bit about that exciting initiative. We actually had the second board meeting of MILA, as we're calling it, today. So this is really timely, and the board was really excited to hear that we were going to be presenting to LIANZA members and spreading the word about the work we were doing as far afield as New Zealand. So it's absolutely fantastic to be here. So if I could have the next slide, Stephane, please.
Oh, one sec. Yeah, okay.
It's going to be seamless. Thank you. So it sort of falls to me just to say a little bit to you about the CILIP Information Literacy Group. I've been the chair of the group now for 6 years, and I've actually been involved in the group since when it was first founded, which was, well, kind of not lost in the midst of times. It was actually in about 2004. So the group has been around for quite a while. It wasn't initially a special interest group of CILIP. It was a sort of a subgroup of another group. So it's kind of got an interesting history, but sort of really reflected the growing interest that started sort of 2000 onwards in the UK and in other countries around the world in information literacy. And I know a lot of that was kind of driven by some of the work that was being done in the US, the ACRL, and the work they were doing about information literacy standards. We had a piece of work that was done around a similar sort of time, was to create what was called the SCONALL 7 Pillars of Information Literacy. So it was quite early in my career I got involved in this area of information literacy, and I think at that time I had been working as a librarian, and one of the things I had really noted was that a lot of work I was doing, I was working at the London School of Economics, it really did involve helping our students sort of navigate the library environment, and also obviously the kind of growing range of electronic resources, the material on the internet. And it was fairly clear to me that even incredibly able students at LSE, you know, very, very high achieving students, would actually really kind of come to the library with what I realized, you know, what I thought were quite sort of basic queries, but to them, obviously, you know, were really fundamental things about not just how to find information, but kind of how did I know that this was a chapter in a book, or where this, you know, why this particular organization was collected by the library and another kind of set of publications weren't. So lots of questions were sort of coming up that made me really start to recognize that students, and actually the staff I was dealing with, needed a lot of help and support in the field of information literacy. And I've kind of never really looked back, I think. I now work as a lecturer. I teach mainly about technology enabled academic practice, and I teach a lot of staff, but I still see that they themselves, but particularly their students, struggle with information literacy sort of challenges. And, you know, I think we have this idea that students have become very tech savvy, and it's such a huge myth that I spend quite a bit of one of my modules trying to dispel. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, because there's lots and lots we could say. There's loads on our website, which I would encourage you to have a look at. I will try to put a couple of links into the chat as well while we're talking, but you'll get these slides afterwards. So, you know, please do follow up some of the things. The group, as I say, has been around for a while. Obviously, one of the things that the pandemic has led us to do is also to sort of think a bit about what our priorities are as a group. We were doing a little bit of work just before, sort of in late 2019, to think a bit about what our strategic plan should look like. And we actually put this out last year at our annual general meeting. And it kind of really tries to consolidate a lot of work that the group does. So we recognise that we are a special interest group of a library professional body, but one of our kind of really key priorities has always been to try to mainstream information literacy, to help everybody have a better understanding of what it is, why it matters. Obviously, the role that librarians play is very important there, but we do really feel that information literacy is something, you know, that should be, you know, everybody in society really needs to have these abilities. We also are particularly looking at inclusivity and making information literacy accessible. I think, again, that kind of ties in a bit with the work to mainstream, but some of, I think, or a lot of work that's done around information literacy is helping students at university, students who you could say already have quite a lot of privileges, who already probably have quite well developed information literacy skills. So thinking about how we develop that in a way that's actually, you know, really inclusive, and, you know, is accessible to those people who are outside of formal education. We really want to build our capacity as a group, because we're a relatively small committee, although we have a really large membership across the CILIP association. So we you know, what we can do really, we need to have more people involved in our committees and our working groups. So we're looking at building our capacity, and primarily as well, obviously what we want to do is support our members who are librarians, who want to kind of share really good practice about information literacy. They want to be using all the best tools and techniques, and they want to be able to kind of connect with each other, and so we do that through a whole range of activities. I'm going to say a bit more about those in a moment, but I think one of the questions that we kind of always end up asking, and, you know, please, if we can go to the next slide, Stephane, is, you know, why might, I mean, if you want to tell me what you think information literacy is, I'm going to come to how we define it in our group, but why does it matter now? You know, it's sort of, in some ways, I feel this group has been around for nearly 20 years. Why might information literacy actually matter now with some of the kind of events that have been happening around the world? I don't know if anyone wants to pop anything in the chat about perhaps discussions you might have been having in New Zealand about that as well, but I think the pandemic has really led us to sort of, you know, keep asking those questions. Yeah, I see Natalie said to combat misinformation. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And public, I'll come back to that question, I think, about public libraries and working with academic libraries. Yeah, I think COVID has highlighted about how easy misinformation can become the norm. Absolutely. Fake news, all of those kinds of things, the diversity of sources that are available. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think this is really something during the pandemic we really, you know, became aware of. And then obviously with the war in Ukraine as well at the moment, everybody's talking about disinformation, who to trust, where you get your kind of news sources from as well. I'm interested to see that health information is also really important. Yeah, that is something that is, you know, as I say, not just because of COVID. I think there is real recognition in the UK at the moment about the importance of health literacy, yeah, and how that relates to information literacy. Okay, keep those ideas coming, and I'm just conscious of time, and I think we'll move on to the next slide, if I could, Stephane. So we did some work in 2018 in the Information Literacy Group to think about the definition of information literacy that we were using as librarians and in CILIP, and the definition that had been created was more than 10 years old, much older than that. And I think one of the things that many of us in the group felt was that it was quite a functional definition of information, and it was quite library centric, and it really kind of sounded like information literacy was very closely associated with formal learning. So we did quite a big piece of work that led up to us creating a new definition of information literacy in 2018. You can probably see in the kind of language that we use in this definition, we're really influenced by UNESCO and the way that they were defining media and information literacy. One of the things we wanted to do was to kind of bring in this idea that it was about critical thinking, it was about making balanced judgments, but also that information literacy was really something that could help us fully engage with society. So it very, you know, aligned with democracy and with people being part of a community as well. We've had some ongoing discussions about the use of the word citizens in our definition. It is still in there, but it is something we may be revisiting. And I see Catherine's just asking me about where digital literacy fits in with that. I think that's a really interesting question. Maybe we could pick that one up at the end, because I think they are very closely aligned. I think what we've seen in the UK is that the government is very much recognising digital literacy. More recently, it's also recognising media literacy, information literacy, not so. So I think, you know, kind of understanding that you know, these terms actually have a very similar sort of meanings, but are used by different communities, is really important. Okay, if I could go to my next slide, please, Stephane. So one of the things we did in the work on the definition in 2018 was to show how information literacy related to 5 different kind of contexts, as we call it. So we picked up on health as being a really important context. Obviously education, information literacy is really important, informal education, and that kind of goes all the way through from whether we're talking about schools to higher education to adult learning as well. Information literacy for the workplace as well, well. We recognise that. Information literacy, as I said, and the role it sort of plays in helping people participate in society, in democracy, in making decisions, in deciding who to vote for. And then this kind of thing that we call everyday information literacy, helping you make choices about energy suppliers. That's a very topical subject in the UK at the moment, with the massive price hikes we're seeing in our energy bills, but you know, all sorts of decisions that people make in their lives that are informed by, you know, their ability to kind of find trustworthy information. So do have a look. We can share. There is a document with more information, but a lot of this work we did, and it kind of really helped inform where we went next, I think, with information literacy. Just wanted to flag up, if I can have the next slide, that the group, one of the things you may have heard of, that the group has been running since 2005 is LILAC, which is the Information Literacy Conference, the UK Information Literacy Conference. We're all incredibly excited and ever so slightly terrified about the fact we haven't had a conference since 2019, and it should be going ahead in a little over 2 weeks' time, so 11th to the 13th of April. Under 2 weeks' time. We're really, you know, really looking forward to getting together. It is primarily a conference that librarians come to, but I know, you know, we've had people from all around the world, and I think we've had people from New Zealand as well. Yes, I saw Senga was here, and she's been at the LILAC conference and presented, and you know, it's a sort of fantastic opportunity for sharing good practice, for kind of, you know, the community coming together. And typically we would have over 300 people at that conference. We're going to be slightly reduced in numbers, but we are looking at about 260 people getting together. So fingers crossed everything goes to plan in Manchester in a few weeks. If I can have the next slide. So last year we weren't able to run the conference for obvious reasons, but we ran an event that we called Festival, which was an online event, and actually I just thought I'd flag up that if you are interested, then we have got a lot of the recordings of their sessions. We've got a YouTube playlist, and you can see some of the speakers, and typically we would bring in speakers you know, from around the world, and actually we do have Emily Drabinski come in to Manchester in April as well, and Emily spoke at the festival event, but also Barbara Pfister, who's, you know, a big voice in the information literacy world. We had some really fantastic, very topical presentations at the festival event, so do dip into those if you're interested. And then I think this is just my final slide. One of the things that the group did when we were in the very sort of early stages, I think in around 2007 or 8, we set up an open access peer reviewed journal, the Journal of Information Literacy, which we fund. It's a diamond open access journal, no fees to publish, and really is, you know, a kind of a place really to share really good high quality research, but also practitioners' research in information literacy. So I think I'm stopping at that point, and I'm hoping I'm not hugely over time, and I think I might be handing over to Anne-Lise at this point. So
No, it's me, I'm afraid. Sorry.
That's
okay,
fine.
I'm just going to provide a little bit of context, because of course everything that Jane has been talking about doesn't happen or hasn't happened in a vacuum, and the context is what you might call in shorthand the UK policy context. The UK hasn't really been very good policy-wise, in terms of national policy, on information literacy or even media literacy. I mean, these are concepts, as Jane was implying, which have been barely recognized. I mean, I think we need to really sort of recognize that information literacy in particular is something which has been very much as a concept discussed quite heavily for years within the library world, but not very much outside the library world. And that has been a problem for us. I mean, one of the things which the Information Literacy Group has been trying to do for many years, without huge amounts of success, has been to try to talk to external audiences outside the library world. I mean, you know, different professions, policymakers, think tanks, public agencies, governments, to try to perhaps get them to develop an understanding of what information literacy is. And it's been very difficult because it hasn't featured very much on public policy radar. Now, things thankfully started to change quite recently, about maybe 2-3 years ago, much behind the curve in comparison with other countries such as Finland, which have recognized these ideas for much longer. And what started changing things, in many ways, it was quite a defensive reaction, because a growing awareness within the machinery of government, among a number of agencies, about the dangers represented by online harms. And online harms is a term that comes up time and time again in public discourse. And disinformation and misinformation is one of the main online harms that's recognized. I think in other words, what we've been seeing more recently is a move away from a little bit of fixation on digital literacy as a set of rather basic functional skills towards a recognition of media literacy, because that's the way the government chooses to see it. Media literacy is quite a big societal challenge with regard to addressing these online harms. Now, Jane was talking earlier, this is actually quite relevant. It's tiresome, but it's relevant. You know, media literacy, information literacy, digital literacy, critical literacy. As far as we're concerned, these are really overlapping concepts. They overlap quite a bit. We can have endless discussions about the merit of one over the other, but I think these discussions are rather pointless. The government and public agencies have chosen to focus on media literacy. You know, we didn't really argue with that, because, you know, in a sense, as far as we're concerned, it's much the same as information literacy. And so they came up last year, less than a year ago now, with their online media literacy strategy. And this is the first time, actually, that in the UK you have a national framework which actually addresses media literacy. It actually, I mean, the strategy actually references information literacy quite explicitly as well. It's quite important. It references information literacy, particularly with regard to what the strategy says about disinformation, combating disinformation and misinformation. So although this document is far from perfect, and it has lots of shortcomings, particularly with regards to you know, inscribing media literacy in the school curriculum, but nevertheless, it's quite an important step forward. And it recognizes, incidentally, the key role that librarians play, particularly public librarians. It doesn't talk about academic librarians, it doesn't talk about school librarians, but it talks quite a bit about public librarians. It's an important first step. I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I mean, you know, it's founded on 5 principles, and I think the key principle is this one, which you see on the screen. You know, need for users to understand how online content is generated and to be able to critically analyze the contents that they consume. I mean, that's very important, because that's the one which possibly has the closest relation, in the sense, to information literacy. It identifies 5 challenges, one of which is, you know, how you evaluate data and information about the effectiveness of interventions. Other challenges including building audience resilience to misinformation and disinformation. And in terms of what we're trying to do, and we'll come to that a bit later, one of the key challenges is coordination. You know, lots of things are happening in a very bitty and ad hoc sort of way among different players, you know, in a charitable sector, and commercial players and public agencies. And the strategy recognizes the importance of actually finding ways of coordinating all this so that we have a sort of a rather cohesive approach to these issues. Next slide. I'm going to hand over actually to Anne-Lise now, who knows rather more. I'll say a few words about this in a moment when Anne-Lise finishes, but she knows rather more about this than I do, because in addition to the strategy, which as I said, came into force last year. Sorry, I meant to say that an important point I forgot to mention about the strategy is that it's not just a theoretical document. It comes with a commitment by the government to enact action plans every year, at least for the next 3 years. So with funding to back it, which is quite important. Not huge amounts of money, but nevertheless a certain amount of money. And the idea is actually to set a series of objectives every year. And this year, for the first year of the implementation of the strategy, the challenge or the focus is going to be on hard to reach audiences, I mean, particularly socially disadvantaged groups. Sorry, I forgot to say this, so I'll just hand over to Anne-Lise now.
Thank you so much. And before I start, I'm just going to post some links in. Oh, I'll post the links in the chat after. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because I'm a librarian at the House of Commons. So the draft online safety bill is something that is featuring quite heavily in my work. So it was announced last year during the Queen's speech. And it really mattered because this bill is an attempt to properly regulate social media companies, news outlets, video sharing sites, and search engine under one legislative umbrella for the first time. And what this law aims to do, what it wants to do, is to make internet service providers responsible for what's happening on their platforms, and that includes things like child abuse, fraud, racist abuse, violence against women, which previously there were very little enforceable sanctions. So in my work, I work really closely with select committees, and last year, towards the end of the year, the draft online safety bill was scrutinized by a joint committee of both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And they did this investigation into the bill, and they heard from a lot of people. They heard from people that have been victims of online harms. They heard from journalists, from academics, from experts. They received hundreds and hundreds of pages of written evidence. It was a really, really big inquiry. And I know that because I was sat next to my colleagues who had to deal with this amount of sometimes really distressing evidence and put the report together. And I can tell you that the first thing they did when it was published is they went to the pub because they really had to. So what came out of this was a report of a 150 pages long report, I believe, that went to the government with recommendations for revisions to the bill. So I could rattle through this really long list of recommendations I want, but essentially what the committee wants is to bring more offences within the scope of the online safety bill. And now we enter the ping pong process because the draft bill is back in the House of Commons. I think the second reading will be done after recess, so about 2 or 3 weeks. And it's anticipated that it's actually going to be there a while. So I'm going to hand back to Stephane now, and he's going to talk to you about the provision for media literacy in this text.
Yeah, I mean, the bill is a huge long document. I mean, I think it's 150 pages or so, but there's a couple of pages which are actually crucial to us because there is a very, very short section on media literacy. And this section does two things. First of all, it provides a definition of media literacy. That's quite interesting because, you know, we were saying earlier that you know, there are lots of ways in which you can define and approach information literacy and media literacy, etc. But what we have here, I mean, once the bill becomes enacted, I mean, it probably won't become law until later this year or maybe early next year, I'm not sure. But, you know, once it's enacted, there will be a statutory legal definition of media literacy. And, you know, the foundation of that is that, you know, I'm not going to read through the whole of it, but, you know, it's an understanding of the nature and characteristics of material published by means of the electronic medium. So it's quite broad. The other thing that the bill provides for is an important role for Ofcom. Ofcom is the media regulator in UK, so it's got quite a broad remit, and the bill will actually increase its regulatory powers. And one of the things which Ofcom has been active for quite a long while in terms of doing research in media literacy, but it's going to have increased powers on promoting media literacy and helping to improve the media literacy of members of the public, and also a role yet to be defined in helping to evaluate or developing good practice towards the evaluation of media literacy interventions. So you have already a beefed up role for the regulator, which is going to play a pretty active role in this sphere in years to come. That's quite an important thing. So I'm going to leave it at that, because it is really quite complicated, and I certainly am not going to go through those 150 pages. Okay, I mean, I think I've sort of really gone over all that. I mean, I think this slide is, I mean, between Jane and Lisa and I, we've already discussed all that, so we'll probably skip that. We come to MILA, the Media and Information Literacy Alliance, which Jane mentioned earlier. Now, bear in mind what I was saying a few moments ago about how difficult it had been in the past to generate interest out there in information literacy. Things are now different because, in a sense, the media literacy strategy, the bill going through Parliament, the beefed up role for Ofcom, is creating a new sense of momentum, in addition to a growing realization in the public realm about the dangers represented by disinformation, including in the political sphere, of course. So we now have an opportunity, which we've never had in the past, to actually blow our own trumpets, which is why we thought it was very timely last summer to do something which some of us have been wanting to do for a long, long time, which is to set up effectively some sort of it's a coordinatory mechanism. Okay, it's an alliance, you could call it a confederation, you could call it a coalition, but it's actually bringing together people both within the library world and beyond the library world. People with an interest and a commitment to media literacy. Well, we've referred to as media and information literacy, and effectively we bung the two concepts together. Jane mentioned UNESCO a little while ago. UNESCO had sort of about 10 years ago defined this notion of media and information literacy. We come from an information literacy background. Nevertheless, we're conscious of the fact that it's media literacy that seems to be really having quite a high profile at the moment. So we sort of merged the two together. So now increasingly we're talking about media and information literacy, as opposed to just information literacy. So it's a cross-sector coalition. It's still relatively early days. I mean, we've done a certain number of things. I mean, we're in the process of trying to define ways in which we relate to our stakeholders. We've set up an executive board, and more about that in a second. The purpose of this is to do a number of practical things. I mean, first of all, it's going to be about advocacy, particularly with regard to public and media relations. Then capacity building. We really want to share good practice. We want to ensure that people know what's going on in different sectors. We want to try to see whether we can develop a role, and there's money needed for that, to develop a sort of a research capability and evidence building. That's a bit of a challenge, but we're starting on that because we're about to commission a piece of work on it's a comprehensive review of information literacy interventions, and we want this to be a platform for knowledge exchange and collaboration. So all that is actually going to happen. It takes a while to do this. I mean, at the moment, MILA doesn't really have huge resources, and it'll take a little while for it to gain credibility and traction. Remember also what I said earlier about the media literacy strategy, calling for coordinatory mechanisms to help glue together the various various things which are happening in a rather ad hoc way across the country. So we feel that, again, there is a real window of opportunity there to play that sort of coordinatory role. And that's the sort of thing that MILA wants to do. This is our board, which was inaugurated in January. It met for the second time today, so it's quite new. And the reason for putting this up there is just to give you an idea of the breadth of professional interests and areas of expertise. We have about 180 people who are currently on our mailing list. About half of them are from the library and information sciences world, and the other half from all sorts of other sectors: education, policy, sort of third sector initiatives, internet good practice, etc., etc. So it's building up a critical mass. I think really you have to watch this space, which I think probably brings me to the end of what I was going to say, and I'm going to hand over to Anne-Lise again.
Thanks, Stephane. So really underpinning the work of the Alliance is our framework. And this is something that we considered really carefully because, as you will know, there are many frameworks around there. There's information literacy one, digital literacy one, media literacy one. There's loads out there. But we really wanted to build on the work that we'd done earlier with the definition, and really build something that wasn't so academic in nature. Because really early on, when we thought about the impact of our work and what we wanted to achieve, what was really core for us was to be meaningful to most people in society within their daily life, so that we could make a real difference. So we decided to base this framework around this aspiration of what people might want for themselves and for others to have sort of happy, healthy, safe lives. So how did we do this? Can I have the next slide, Stephane? So we needed to know what the public understood media and information literacy to be, and how they formulated that in their own words. So we carried out some interviews with some family, friends and colleagues. That was the Information Literacy Group, and then we analyzed the results. So on the slide you can see 3 examples that we felt encapsulated really well. There's some really strong elements that came through which show that the people we spoke to really understood what information literacy and being information literate meant, and it really called back to the definition of information literacy that Jane discussed earlier. Can I have the next slide, Stephane? And then when we talked to all of these people, we also surveyed why they found media and information literacy valuable. So as you can see on the screen, they were able to articulate some really broad and critical notions. They could see the benefits, but they could also see the dangers of not being media and information literate. We could see that they understood the impact that it would have in their daily lives. So that logically led us to develop our framework. Can I have the next slide, Stephane? Oh, I think you might have, oh, I'm not sure oh, thank you. Yeah, I need all of the little hexagons on if you can. Thank you. Yes, so that's how we develop our aspirations. What does it actually mean for people? And we try to crystallize those aspirations as simply and succinctly as possible. So you can see we've got be informed, empowered, be healthy, be socially conscious, and be connected. As you can see on the screen, we've got all of these little hexagons, and they're all really concentrated around be informed, because for us, that was the real focus. It means people can find trustworthy information, they can fact check it, they can make sense of it. And it really is the core of the whole framework. It's an umbrella aspiration, really. And I think being informed is how people, it's the vocabulary that the people we talk to actually used. So we felt that was really essential. Because when you're informed, you are empowered, you are able to live a healthy life. You can be socially conscious, you can be connected. So we wanted really be informed to anchor all of these. And I'm not going to talk through all of the others. The framework is online, so you can have a look for yourself. So you'll be glad to know I won't discuss all of these. I will just focus on being informed. Can I have the next slide, Stephane? So when we started thinking about developing the framework with the Information Literacy Group, as I said, we knew what we wanted to achieve was something that people understood. So we are a group of practitioners from different sectors. We interact with a wide variety of people. They're from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different spheres. So as a group, we know exactly what issues different people are encountering and what sort of problems they're trying to solve. So what we did is we came up with really concrete examples that we witnessed in our practice to form the base of the framework. And it allowed us to think more broadly about what each of these aspirations meant in day-to-day life. So these are the examples that you can see on your screen. And what I think one of them you'll agree that we've experienced really recently was finding unbiased information about contested and difficult issues. So, you know, the war going on in Ukraine at the moment, I was listening to a journalist from the BBC this morning talking about fake news and misinformation. And she was sharing that when the war just broke out, literally in the first couple of hours, media outlets were faced with a lot of misinformation coming from Russia. And the strategy that they had to employ to try very quickly with very little people there to stop this barrage of misinformation going on. Can I have the next slide, please, Stephane? So what we've done with all of these examples is we've highlighted for each aspiration what people could understand and what they could do. So as you can see on the screen with Be Informed, it means that you understand that information has value and it's got purpose. You understand that not all information is reliable and accurate. Everybody's got different expertise and also biases and blind spots. And I'm sure I've seen that mentioned in the chat. So we really wanted to put that to the front, that information is complex, and stress the critical work that goes beyond simply finding the information, and include things like fact-checking, recognizing and understood biases. And then what we've done is we've also written some quite concrete things that it means. What can you do if you're informed? What sort of things, what sort of skills and what sort of behaviors really? And I'm sure you will be really familiar with these on the screen. So things like checking the authorship of information, knowing what the difference is between mis and disinformation, deciding on a particular expert, these sort of things. And from these now, what we hope to build is something that might start looking like a bit more like a traditional framework. So I'm not going to talk through all of the rest of the aspirations because time was of the essence. But I really would like you, if I could give you some homework, to think about how this framework and how these aspirations relate to your professional practice, the people you work with, the people around you, your loved ones, your friends, your community, and how you would go about working with this framework further down the line. And I'm sure at the end, we've got our contact details. Can I have the next slide, please, Stephane? So what's next for the framework? Well, the immediate next step, I think in 2 weeks, the three of us are delivering a workshop at LILAC, where we are going to ask our fellow information professionals to help us contextualize the framework for us, and we're hoping that we're going to get a lot of good ideas from that. We're hoping to take it a bit more on the road with us as well, hence the little suitcase. Now that we're able to travel a little bit again, it would be nice to talk to other people about the framework and really get this sort of crowd building approach to it. We're working with other professional bodies, with the groups, associations. That's the beauty of the Alliance. So, for example, the Health Libraries group at CILIP helped us develop the Be Healthy, and were really helpful peer reviewers for us. And then the final task would be just collating all of that and, you know, just finish the framework. No big deal at all. And that's it from me. If you want to move on, Stephane. I think I'm handing back to you, Jane.
Thanks, Anne-Lise. Yes, I think it's back to me. So I really, it's just a kind of a quick wrap up from me, really. If, you know, we'd love to have any feedback, and we've got a little bit of time for discussion, so we will stop talking. But if you want to have a look at the framework and a bit more about MILA, then it's on the website. I think this is a really, really exciting time to be involved in information literacy, probably the most exciting, you know, for sort of the last 20 years or so that I've been working in this field. But I think it's also, you know, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us as well. And I just wanted to end with this lovely quote that I always think when you think about the idea of kind of, you know, whether you should do something and fear and what if I fall, but oh my darling, what if you fly? So we'll watch this space, I think, really, whether MILA and you know, media and information literacy really is going to fly in the UK. That's our contact details. I know we've had lots and lots of questions, so we could perhaps stop sharing the screen, and we'll try and plow through some of the questions that have been in chat, pick some of those up, take any more questions that we've got time for. So thank you everyone. Hopefully you found something useful in there, and you know, we would, as I say, we would love our feedback on our framework.
Thanks, Jane and Stephane and Anne-Lise. That was really fascinating insight into a lot of what's going on in the UK. I'm sure we've got lots of questions about perhaps how we could do it here. But anyway, let's start taking some questions. Do you want to pick up some questions from the chat that you'd like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think is it Farasat has put a couple of questions to us about information literacy in a sort of post-COVID hybrid learning environment, and how that might have influenced information literacy. That's a big question to think about. We ran an event actually last summer, talking about kind of you know, the types of information literacy activities people have been doing during the lockdown, how it might have changed information literacy teaching. I don't myself at this point, I'm sure it's going to have a big effect, but I think it's a bit too early to know what that might be. I certainly know that when we did a little survey of people about the sort of teaching that they were doing during the lockdown, some of what they were saying was actually they had a lot more potential by teaching online sessions to reach more audiences, and many librarians were actually saying they were doing a lot more teaching and they were much more active during this time. But I know, you know, I think that's something that everyone's going to be talking about at the LILAC conference. Anne-Lise, did you want to respond to that question?
No, I wanted to take another one, so please feel free to carry on.
No, that's fine. No, I mean, I think, you know, I'd love, I think I'm now not a librarian, so I don't have a clear picture, but I know that in this kind of post-COVID world, it has changed quite a lot of things about how I teach in my modules. My modules are mainly staying online, in fact, and the feedback has been incredibly positive because I have staff, it's a master's program, and they love the modules being taught like this, which has been very interesting. Anne-Lise, shall I go back to you? You wanted to take another question? And then I'm just aware that, hand up.
Yeah, Janet, are you okay if I take the questions from the chat first?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I wanted to answer Dahlia's questions about data literacy, because it is a conversation that we had with Jane, because we realized when we were putting the aspirations together and developing following on from the examples, working the I can and the I understand, we knew that there were related literacies under each of these, and we had that conversation about data literacy, because it's so easy when we talk about fake news, misinformation, disinformation, to think that to refer to qualitative information. But it's something that I'm really aware, working with parliamentary researchers, that data literacy is a fundamental. So it will feature in there. Same as talking about algorithms and algorithmic bias, which is something that I actually teach to select committee researchers about when we talk about digital biases. So it's something that will feature there as well, and something that is quite prominent in the news. So yeah, that definitely will feature. So I'll hand to you, Janet, for your question.
Thank you. It's really great to hear that you have created this alliance that moves beyond library land, because for decades we've spoken to ourselves and I don't think achieved much at all. So my question would, well, what I sort of really would love to see in New Zealand is a real national drive to create change, and we can't do it just talking to ourselves. So it's great to see the alliance where you are getting other sectors involved. So my question would be, who are the really important players that you want to see actively engaged? I mean, the strategy is great, the bill is great, you know, you're finally starting to get some movement after decades of talking about it. So what can we do? Who should we be talking to move the dial substantially in this country?
I was going to say Stephane might be the best place to answer that, but it's...
Have a word with Jacinda Ardern, maybe. I mean, I think you're absolutely right when you say that it's been incredibly difficult to get the conversation going out with the library world. MILA would not have happened had there not been a nudge from governments. I mean, you know, if you want a single major player, then I'm afraid it has to be governments, and I'd say even more so than the social media platforms, because you know, we've seen in other countries, and Finland is the country that's always given as an example. I mean, in Estonia, a number of other countries. Those are countries where governments have taken the lead, have really grasped the nature of the challenge. You know, it's no coincidence that some of the countries which have done the most in this area are countries which border Russia. You know, it's down to that. You know, in other words, countries which are most vulnerable to fairly malicious disinformation campaigns, and the governments have chosen to push, you know, effectively by developing educational frameworks, by developing their school curriculums, by organizing, you know, campaigns, and you know, you need that. So I mean, okay, it's not necessarily the Prime Minister, but I mean, if you have any sort of political influence, and I haven't a clue how it works in New Zealand, but if you have connections within the machinery of government, within public agencies, then those are the things that you need to exploit, and among politicians as well, among MPs. I mean, you know, it may well be that there are members of parliament who happen to be particularly interested, but I'm afraid that you know, the lesson we've learned is that we got absolutely nowhere for years without this push.
Yeah.
I wanted to also bring up that in Parliament, we have APPGs, which stand for all I'm just reading my screen here, all-party parliamentary groups, and they are informal cross-party groups of MPs and Lords with a shared interest. So we're lucky to have one on libraries in the UK. There are loads and loads of them, so it might be a structure that you have as well, but I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in your system.
Thank you.
If I could just respond as well to the point about that Adrian's made about your Ministry of Education. We tried for 20 years to get our Department for Education to listen to us, to absolutely no avail. And it's really interesting that it took this strategy and the work coming out of a completely different department, which is digital culture, media and sport, which does have this kind of role with sort of, you know, regulating the media as well. I think some of the kind of the advocacy work, I mean, Stephane has been the advocacy and outreach officer for the Information Literacy Group for about 5 years. And he really has been relentless in his kind of banging on the doors of many organisations and trying to work out who best to talk to in government. But we have never managed to get anywhere with our Department for Education of getting this into our school curriculum. It's you know, and we're actually, some of the organisations that we've got involved in MILA are actually particularly organisations related to adult education and adult learning, and you know, it's you know, it's not that none of us, we all think this is incredibly important, but it has been acknowledged by all sorts of people in the sort of media literacy sphere, researchers, you know, all sorts of bodies as well, that our getting something in our school curriculum is just not going to happen. It's been really frustrating, but when we've ever tried, we're just told it's in there already, largely. And we had a huge focus on teaching kids how to code, which when you asked anyone, they said, oh yeah, it's digital literacy, we're teaching them all how to code. Yeah, so it's we're not completely given up, and we've got lots of school librarians who are really active in trying to do things, but it's kind of really grassroots stuff. It's not coming from the top down.
I mean, the resolving the problem with the Department for Education, it is and totally political.
Oh, Stephane, I think we might have lost you.
That's Stephane telling us that it's almost time.
Are there any more questions that you'd like us to pick up on, Natalie, that's in the chat? Has anyone maybe take one last question?
Hello everyone. I would just like to add that
hi, Neda.
hello everyone. I've joined you a little bit later today. We had a bit of a crisis here at the campus this morning, so I'd just like to add to this conversation really that I work currently in a specialized smaller tertiary institute, and there was no information literacy comprehensive program that would address particularly specific learning needs for students from various backgrounds and various sort of levels of different types of skills and literacies and learning skills as well. And so the program has been put in place fully a year ago. And so this year, we are basically seeing the first generation of students here who are graduating, who have had opportunity to attend the workshops, to interact with learning support staff throughout their studies and get that really full support. And the feedback we're getting from them, even feedback we're not requiring, has been absolutely phenomenal. So that we have them coming next week to basically film that they actually suggested to basically provide video statements or small interviews about their experience and the huge impact, huge difference to their learning. and development has the information literacy program and support made to their study journey here in New Zealand. And so we don't really, as librarians, over time, when we just do things we do on a daily basis, we don't realize what enormous and critical change all these efforts that we make, from the political to policy to teaching, practice and pedagogy, and working directly with people, it makes a huge difference in their lives, and inevitably it affects the lives of their family, the quality of life and education they're receiving, and the way they're able to apply that training and knowledge they have in their practical life, and for basically through as long as they live. The difference is phenomenal. Because I can see it. This is the first time in my career I was able to see it, the difference, without having no comprehensive information literacy support program, anything in place, versus what happens, what's the outcome and effect after having it fully implemented in the first generation of students who are able to have it. Enormous change, enormous. So I just want to thank everyone, especially our guests today, for everything they do, for all their efforts, for lifelong commitment to this cause and to changing people's lives. There was a lot of comments about what information literacy is and different types of literacies, but really it is changing people's lives. So that's my 5 cents today. Anyone
Awesome.
else?
I think we might have to wrap things up here. That's all good. Glenn, are you all right if I do the closing karakia?
Yep, that'd be great.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you
Natalie.
so much to everyone who attended and our awesome speakers. Wow, that's just been really great to just get that insight today. We have recorded this session, so you can go back and view it again. And I'm just going to close with our karakia, so that those that have to go can go and do their next thing. So, kia ino tātou, whakanoa e tēnei wahi, whakanoa e tēnei kōrero, whakanoa e tēnei tangata, haumie, hui e, tai ki e. Thank you, everybody.